Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds and under 30 different ways to use hunger mechanic. I'm Davey, and with me is Phil. How you doing, Phil?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
All right, good to hear. We are coming at you. The most recent news we've had was how some of the head crackers fighters work. So we're waiting on them to drop. We got a little peek at the 4 different fighters and an idea of some of the mechanics and some more hints on what's going on there. Pretty interesting. I saw a lot of speculation all over the place. Like it's the usual, like some people think they're busted and some people think they're trash. So I think feels like it may be a little too early to say, but
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, but that seems to be the vacillation recently on the interwebs, is that just about every time we see a new warband, those are the only 2 opinions. There's never anybody saying, no, they're going to be somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. I think there's occasionally a few people trying to talk other people off the ledge one way or the other, but anyway, but I'm looking forward to them. I like the figs, which nothing new. It's tend to be the case with almost every warband we see, but
we'll get plenty of primacy interactions. So that'll be fun.
Yeah.
Or we should anyway.
Yeah. See how they kind of tweak that. It's interesting because Crimson Court arrived and they do a lot with hunger, but pretty much nobody else is, for the most part, doing anything with hunger. So they kind of unlock hunger, but people are already doing plenty with primacy. So that'd be something to see if they take a mechanic that's already in full swing and what they do with that. So,
for sure.
You got any community shoutouts?
Not really. I've been kind of out of paying attention to what's been going on much in the community. I been seeing a few things about Team Clash and some of the other online Clash stuff that's been going on, but I haven't been paying super close attention to any of that.
Sure.
But I know you've got a handful of things.
Yeah. Just some content creators. The Tabletop Sydney is still going strong. I actually am a little behind. I'm having trouble keeping up because they put out so much stuff, which is awesome. But I especially wanted to shout them out because they tried a new format, which I think is cool, where they had 2 players draft different teams or different war bands basically to play, and then they will do like a series against each other. I think it's a best of 5, and I think once you win with a warband, you're done with them, and so it's you're trying to get those wins, but like once you use your power warband, they're no longer available. So there's some cool matchup planning going on there. I haven't. I'm one report short of catching up to that, so I haven't watched it yet. So I apologize if I got some of the details wrong, but I'm pretty excited to see that. And so, still making great contact, still and innovating as well, which makes it especially fun. We've been a little remiss in not mentioning Agents of Sigmar. They're still chugging along. I got to watch one where Pete was busting out the Reavers, which is always a pleasure. So it kind of doesn't matter who they're playing against. I'm going to root for them. So but yeah, I forgot those guys do a really good job with their production and everything like that. So if somehow you haven't been watching or don't know about them, you should check them out.
Yeah, they're like one of the OG YouTubers.
Exactly.
Been around forever.
Yep. And speaking of being remiss, this is like a double whammy because I threw out that challenge for like what the fastest what warband you could get the farthest in a single action, and I had posited that it was either Spike Claws or Farstriders with 31 hexes. And I will say I gave myself a little bit of an out in saying that I may have overlooked something. Please let us know. Well, a couple of people did let us know. So, and then the other half of my goof is that I forgot to shout them out last episode. So, fine Southern gentleman, Mr. Hussman, and Tristan, both pointed out correctly that you can actually go 33 hexes in a single activation, provided it is in the second round, and you are using the Lady Harrow's Mournflight, who have both a +2 move and a double move,
Yeah.
and get up to speed 5. So they kind of combine the best of both the worlds that we're pulling from the other two. So 33 hexes, that's enough to do a full circuit of the board, and you don't quite land on your starting space, I think, but you get to do the whole perimeter. And because you're doing it with Mournflight, you can just go right through those blocked hexes if there happens to be like blocked on the edge. So thanks, guys, for setting us straight, and congrats to you for spotting my glaring error. So, yeah. What have you been up to? What the heck is going on with you, Phil?
So I'm still working on my Seraphon. I'm like one of the slowest painters ever. So I'm not quite done with base coats on them yet, but I'm very close. And I'm very excited because that means that I get to start doing highlights soon, which is where they're going to stop looking ugly, hopefully.
Yeah.
Because right now they just look like a crazy color palette of just lots of colors all over the place.
The dreaded ugly phase when you are sure you're screwing up your beautiful miniatures.
So, yep, for sure. But probably even more exciting than that, I just finished my vaccination series, and so I'm really hoping that I actually get to play with them in person on a table with dice at some point in the not too distant future.
Outrageous.
I know, right?
There's some of the Mortal Realms crew we've been discussing how at what time we'd feel good with it, and then what we might do. Are we setting up in a garage somewhere or on a porch or what? So it's a fun energy to be kicking around.
Oh man, it feels kind of a little crazy to be even thinking about it, but it's here. It's arrived.
Yeah.
Well, how about you, Davey? What have you been up to?
Well, I have been reinforcing my desire to play in person, because playing on some of these other platforms, who hats off to the people who have made them possible. They're incredible. But I've been kind of an apology to if I've played you recently for the sloppy play. I've been doing stuff like seeing, some of it's using decks you haven't used before, but I'll look at art on a card and think I know what that card is, and then play as if it was. So there was one where I was like, and now I will score survival of the fittest. And then my opponent's like, that's just spoilers. And I was like, sure is. Really wish I would have scored that back when I could have, but here we are in the end phase. So yeah, those comical goof ups have been happening in the Vassals of the Underworld League, which is I think Beard Arm is running that, so hats off to him. And then I just want to give a tip of the hat to I think Chopin and Pispa are the handles they go by. I got to play both those guys recently. They trounced me 0-2-0-2, and were very forgiving and understanding as I conducted the aforementioned sloppy play. But some of that was because I took a dip into and we didn't mention this community shoutouts, but or you kind of did, the Vassal Grand Clash happened, and there were some really cool decks in there. Got won by Aripa's deck that was using 10 Gambits and 11 upgrades, which is pretty cool.
Heresy.
Yeah, but I mean, I think some of it was to make sure that Loaded with Plunder goes off and that sort of thing. So there was a strong reasoning behind it. So that was cool. That was a Diablerist, I believe, that took it down. So really cool deck, really fun. And there were other very fun decks to reading, including one Tommy Conboy had a Despoiler deck, and that's part of how I crashed and burned so hard in this league. Is I was like, wow, this deck looks cool, and started trying it out. Like, whoa, this has a really, really high skill cap. And if I'm in the position of like not reading my objectives correctly, then I am nowhere near that skill cap. But I mean, we're talking like there's no sidestep in there, but there is shifting shards. Like there's some galaxy brain things going on there.
Yeah.
So it was fun. It was really fun to see these decks and try a couple of them out and be like, wow, there's so much room to, kind of catch up with with what this person has designed. And it was I think you mentioned it was kind of cool. You had that deal where you can't just pull the top deck and auto win with it, right? Like
Yeah.
as a demonstration, that it takes a lot of skill to pilot that and sort of thing. So, and speaking of a lot of skill, my teammates, I sat on the bench and cheered my teammates on in the Path to Glory league, and they won the semis and won the finals with some really tight matches. Really impressive against B Tomato. That's Benny, Matt, Shuby, and I think Tommy was their cheerleader. And then Team Italy, who had beaten us previously. I think we managed to get our revenge in the final and take it down in some very, very close matches. So that was very cool. Nick and Gora and Jimmy Molini all were the first stringer teammates on mine. So it was cool to get to cheer them on, watch them play at a high level. So, and as we mentioned, Gora's got his own blog, which he's still putting content out on there. That's Keep Chopping. So that's a lot of stuff, I guess. So it feels good. Some of it is that the kids are back in school in person. So I've had, I think, 2.5 days so far that were where I wasn't working and they were off, and that just frees up a lot of time where I can get chores and do some fun stuff too. So anyway, that's a lot of preamble. Our overview today is the Universals from the Crimson Court. We've got to see them in play, and so we'll give you the review with a little more playtime than we might normally have had with these.
Yeah.
So.
An actual review for once rather than just some hot takes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no hot takes anymore. They would be lukewarm at best at this point. Just experience speaking instead. So we'll start in the usual spot. Kick it off with objectives.
Yeah.
All right. I think you cranked out some stats here.
Ooh, yeah. Well, it seemed. I mean, I find it interesting. Hopefully everyone else does, because I keep pulling all this information. But if you don't like it, let us know, and we can cut it. There's no reason to keep talking about it if no one cares. Yeah. But for these universals, we're now back to a split even of 5 surges and 5 end phase cards again, which is good, I think. They keep being close, but it's not always 5-5, perfectly even split. So kind of interesting that they keep not having it be. It's like it's not a perfect pattern. It's like, oh, it's always close, but it's never quite there.
Not quite there.
And then we had a lot fewer dual and hybrids this time around. There are 3 new hybrids, but there's only 1 new dual. And I feel like from building decks for the Starblood Stalkers, where I care about having both duals and hybrids, I feel like I now have a better understanding of what dual objectives are in the game, and there are not a ton of them, or at least not a ton that I would actually want to play. So it's kind of interesting that I guess I always assumed there was a pretty even split, but I think there's actually a lot more hybrids than duals, even though hybrids usually are easier to score. So kind of interesting. Again, all these surges are for 1 glory, so we don't have any 2 glory surges, which I think is probably a good pattern to be seeing in the game. And 3 of the 5 end phase this time are for 2 glory. So again, I think they're trying to reinforce end phase cards that are more valuable, because a lot of the time I think it becomes this sort of weird thing where it's like I have to do so much more work for this end phase, but I don't get a lot more reward.
Right. It's nice to try and find that balance. There's the 1 glory end phase, they have to be real easy to find space in the deck, and so that 2 is often kind of a sweet spot where you're really deciding like, ooh, that's where you do a lot of the thinking, right? Like how hard is this? So
yeah. But so that's some stats about these objectives. I don't know. I guess we've lately just kind of been going through all of them. I don't know if you want to do that again
Yeah, let's
or
give it a shot. We'll
sure.
let's uh let's plan on it this time, and we can march through. So
All right, cool. So I guess I'll give it to you first. Are there any in here that you felt were very interesting in terms of objectives?
I guess we'd say Season of Famine was in there.
Mm-hmm.
Notable because it gives another reward for hunger. We're still in this spot where you wonder, is there anyone other than vamps who are going to be able to do anything with hunger? So this is 2 glory end phase. Surviving fighters have 10 or more hunger counters, and it's not friendly, so it's
Yep.
any surviving fighters. So there you may have some counterplay if you're I don't know. It'd be tough to take this counting on other people to have hunger, but it is good to know, because there are some of the ways of manipulating hunger end up throwing hunger on enemy fighters, and so if you've done that, you give yourself a little more flexibility with what you're putting on
Yeah.
or how you're using your own resource. So um, I think we're always just kind of keeping an eye out for how bulked out does the hunger mechanic get.
Yeah. I mean, this feels like one where if the vampires were to ever get to be into a situation where they were like super dominant, especially with hunger play styles, that this would almost be an auto take as a counterplay.
Yeah, it's tough. I
But
mean, a warband's got to be. I mean, they'd have to be all, and I don't know.
I
I
mean,
don't know that
they'd have to
they're
be like Mollog level, right? Like
right.
you'd have to be planning your deck around making sure you could beat them.
Yeah, and even then, when you tech against something, I find it's almost always that you tech a gambit or an upgrade in. It feels
Yeah.
pretty rare that you end up teching in an objective. Um,
Yeah.
I'll find like whatever the dominant warband is will sometimes like block out an objective for me. Like I don't want to take this because it's going to be hard in that matchup, but it rarely makes me put in something that would only score against it. It may increase the value of a particular thing, but yeah.
Right.
What about you?
So a lot of these are, I guess I'll just make a blanket statement here that a lot of these are sort of interesting, maybe like fringe choices. I don't think there was any that really jumped out as being like, wow, this is a really good card. I'm definitely going to think about putting this in a bunch of decks.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a lot in here that, depending on your build, might have some interesting uses. And I guess I'll go to Dominant Display first,
Sure.
even though I think there's maybe a couple others that might be a little easier to use. But this is yet another card where they're trying to incentivize being in enemy territory. But the catch is that it's all surviving friendly fighters in enemy territory, but you also then need to have the primacy token.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for 2 glory, so it is, I mean, it's worthwhile payout, but it is kind of a lot of work. I do wonder if warbands like Rippas really like this. Just because that's probably what you're doing anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
Rippa's getting primacy can be tricky unless they're proud runnering, right?
yeah.
Or they have some of the other ways of picking it up. But yeah, you could definitely see something where you move 1-2, and you're basically your last move is make sure the last guy gets in and use proud runner to grab primacy on your way in, and it's a big
Yeah.
score. So if you got the way to do it,
Yeah. And I mean, looking at this one and then looking at it, a lot of the in faction cards that they've been putting in lately where they're emphasizing being in enemy territory, I kind of wonder if at some point we'll hit a critical mass of like, oh, this is going to be a thing where the whole strategy is just to get into the enemy territory.
mm.
But I don't think we're there yet. This one still feels pretty tough to me, but I thought it was interesting. How about you? How about another one from you? Another one that you think is
I'm gonna reverse this and make this a question for you.
oh
So
okay,
magical mauling. You are someone who's played. You've played more curse breakers and Eyes of the Nine than me. We know. I mean, this is the one that was it Colossal Fist. This
yeah,
is one that all of a sudden the fact that can be affected by great strength and stuff like that matters more for this card than before. But those other two warbands I just mentioned are the ones that can kind of bump up to that damage with some upgrades. Well, based on that, like your experience with Magic Warbands, how do you rate this? Do you feel like this is doable, or is this really kind of reaching too far?
I mean, I think it's doable, but it still feels tough. I think so. Stormsire, you could definitely do it now that we have Glory Seeker back, right? Because you can just get a +1 damage on his spell attack, and then
Sure.
easily inspire, and then you're plinking people for 3.
Fighter's Ferocity works in there too.
Yep. So, I mean, I think it could play there. I don't know if it's a great choice though, because you are still relying on upgrades to get there. Like, I think it's okay. I just don't know that it makes a ton of sense, because there's probably a lot easier things to score. So I just don't know if it's efficient enough.
Sure.
Although I think if I remember correctly from the Headcracker's preview, they did say that Headcracker's spell attack, when it's adjacent, gets +2 damage. And I think bumps it up to 3 base.
Oh, yeah.
So he could probably score this.
Yeah.
But that'll kind of depend on how the rest of the warband plays, I think.
Sure. Right. And as we know, it's always risky to be including objectives that are hinging entirely on one fighter unless you're real confident.
Yeah. The wizard linchpin decks have always been feast or famine, I feel like.
Speaking of Headcrack, he's pictured on Channeled Hunger, which is a one in the end phase for having one or more friendly wizards on an objective, and they also have to have one or more hunger counters. So this is the card you would never take before you take Magical Mark, because Magical Mark is just have a wizard on an objective. And I don't know if it's an effect you would double down on, although Crimson Court, relatively, you have 2 wizards, they're very easy to have them on hunger. And I think there's maybe some play with the other ones who might look at this with Curse Breakers, who there's some magical interaction with hunger that, maybe, but I don't know that they particularly need it. But
I mean, holding one objective in either player's territory is very easy.
That's true.
So, I mean, maybe. Yes, it could become something of a flex play there, but
sure.
I think the hunger counter requirement does make it feel
maybe a
little off.
Control vamps where you could
maybe
back off to the back and sit on it. I think you were using it in one of our games.
I was using it. I tried it out in one of our test games for the Crimson Court, and I think after the game, when we were talking about the decks, you basically pointed out to me that it didn't really make sense to be using this over the other one, because it's just blatantly easier to score the other one.
Yeah.
Although in the Crimson Court, it's kind of a wash, because you're pretty much always going to have those hunger counters unless you're inspired.
That was Channeled Hunger. What else do you want to talk about here?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll go to the other one that I felt seemed like an interesting option that maybe could show up in some decks. And that's Disastrous Hunt. So this is one where you score in an end phase if 2 or more enemy hunters are out of action. It's for 2 glories, so again, it is a good payout. I think the problem is that, again, like, anytime your objectives depend on your opponent, I feel like it's always a risky play. I mean, there's so many situations where you could show up into a match and be like, oh, they have no hunters innately, so this card, unless they play upgrades, is entirely dead.
Yeah.
And that's always a bad feeling, at least to me. So, it has a decent payout. I don't know. I think this is going to be super meta dependent. And given the current meta, the top 4 warbands don't have, other than Ripa's, don't really have hunters. So
yeah, it's those little unreliable to try to kill 2 Rippas. I think this
Yeah.
card is showing you how you use it. You use it if you know that you're playing your friend who likes Seraphon, and then you kill a bunch of skinks and stand over them in an
Yeah.
opposing manner. So
Or yeah, I mean you show your dominance over
yeah,
their hunting ability. I guess if Grimwatch were to make a rebound, like if hold objective play gets good again and we start seeing Grimwatch all over the place, this deck maybe,
sure.
or this card, I guess, maybe
Yeah,
shows back up.
yeah. Or when despoilers surge up again,
Oh
just
yeah,
just pop
take
off Gnarl and I don't know, Korsh there.
get your
That
two
wasn't so
glory.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I think after that though, uh, there's not a ton of the rest of these that I found to be super compelling, but
Yeah.
maybe what else do you see as maybe being interesting, if
Um,
not strong?
yeah, it's it's kind of tough. There's not so fast is worth mentioning just to be specific about the wording because it's going to come back around with a card later. But this is
Oh
a
man.
hybrid score immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action, which takes an enemy fighter with a higher move characteristic than each surviving fighter out of action, which is different than saying an enemy fighter with the highest move action.
Yep.
So whoever you kill cannot be tied for the highest; they have to
Yep.
be the highest. Um, it's there's like weird, or it's also just take an enemy quarry out of action. So
Which is
uh,
probably the more reliable way to use this, but yeah.
right. Curiously, like outrun death kind of almost does both those things for you because you can use it
Yeah.
on somebody. So you can, I'm about to take this person out. I'm going to make them a quarry. Also, I'm going to make them very fast.
Very
So
interesting.
that's kind of a way. I don't. I feel like keep an eye on this sort of thing because there may be a. I'm going to specifically try to beat up on quarries. I think there's a gambit here which helps you target quarries
Yep.
down the line. So, but I think with the competition for surges, unless you are, I'm saying like I don't think I'll see it, and then the next Grand Clash, the winning deck will
Yeah.
have it in there. I'll
Of
be like,
course.
what? There's a couple real rough ones. I think Skin and Bones and Fatal Underestimation are pretty low on the list for me.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, so like Skin and Bones, I reading through this card, I just have to ask myself like, why? Why did you like? Why even write this? No one's gonna play this.
Yeah.
So this one is you score this in an end phase for one if an enemy fighter has a number of hunger counters equal to or greater than their wounds characteristic, which, like, the only warband who's playing with hunger right now is the vampires. So
Mm.
that's at least 4 hunger counters on them. That's a lot. Or there are no surviving enemy fighters with a wounds characteristic of 3 or more. So
Right.
only 2 wound fighters left alive like that. There's not even very many warbands where that's like a realistic possibility.
Yeah. Oh man. Even just talking about this now, I realized I was reading that as that would be okay. Like you would auto score it into Gits or Godsworn Hunt, but even they are too beefy for
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Ooh,
They
boy.
have to be 2 wound fighters to be able to
Wow.
score on the second condition. So
That's that kind of hybrid we talk about where like one half of it is a never ever.
yeah.
And the
Yeah.
other, yeah.
So unless there's like some new warband coming in the future that's all 2 wound fighters, steer clear of Skin and Bones.
Yeah. I think there's a future I would see where it could be if you had a way
Yeah.
to kind of aggressively throw hunger on other on the enemy, then this becomes a way to score something without dice, which is
Yeah.
always so. That's the only thing I would keep in the back of my mind is see what other hunger cards come out, and
There'd
but
have to
even
be so many
yeah,
more hunger objectives, I feel like. But yeah,
sure,
maybe
yeah.
that is a possibility. How
And
about
then
that?
fatal.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was gonna say, how about that fatal underestimation then?
Yeah. So score immediately if you take a target of action and the target had one or more supporting fighters. It's not. It's better than skin and bones, but it just requires your opponent to have position in a particular way, and it requires you to make like a attack under suboptimal conditions. Now, that being said, if you are a warband that leverages scything quite a bit, or some
Yeah.
such, then there's a decent chance. I think if this was a succeed an attack, then I'd be
Oh yeah.
very interested in it. But because you have to take them out of action, it feels a little bit too much to ask. It's hard to think of the scenario where that's the way to go. So
Yeah. I feel like I always want my surges to be near guaranteed scores. Like that's the whole reason they exist.
mm-hmm.
And this is going to be a situation where, unless your opponent clumps up or your opponent plays upgrades that give innate support,
Yeah,
like this isn't gonna just not gonna come up. And
yep,
having a dead search just, feels bad.
yeah. Um, I actually not great as leveling strike as well. This is where you
Yeah.
got to drop, and it's in the same sense as not so fast. You have to. The one part of the hybrid is knock somebody down that has the highest tie is not allowed, the highest wounds characteristic, or take an enemy leader out of action. That's both of those are difficult and difficult to time. If you have an opportunity to do one of those things, you're gonna do it when you can do it, and you don't want to have to be waiting around for this objective to show up at the right time.
Yeah. It's strictly better than Assassinate from Shadespire, but that doesn't mean much.
Yeah,
um, so
yeah,
yeah. It's
sure.
I don't know, like making anything that's a surge where you have to kill like the toughest fighter on the board just seems
Yeah,
like
and
why?
unlike not so fast, it's much harder to manipulate somebody else's wounds in this.
Yeah.
You think of like the warbands that have big fellas, so crushes, but the problem is they're all on 5 anyway. So
Yep.
this doesn't go off. So there's a more interesting search here. Supreme Confidence.
Yes.
Score immediately after you discard the primacy token if your warband holds one or more objectives in enemy territory. We've talked about some of that, like feign weakness, feign strength build. Maybe there's ways to kind of manipulate that, and there's some things you can do to spin the primacy token. There's a damage reduction one, so you get yourself onto an objective, and then you're holding something and discard it, hopefully not driven back off of it. So I think there may be something there, especially if you're going to start manipulating. It'd be interesting to see if the Headcrackers mob want this, because I think they may be interested in, if they are inspiring on getting primacy, they may be interested in getting it, dropping it, getting it, dropping it, sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering the same thing. And then I don't remember which one it was, but from the preview, it sounded like you have one of their fighters whose ability, I think, is that if he holds an objective in enemy territory, he can
Oh
gain
yeah,
primacy,
it
right?
was like primal tracking or something like that.
Yeah.
The archer, it had to be, he had to hold it, and nobody could be within 2 of him, I think.
Yeah.
And then
But
he could pick up primacy.
kind of suggests there might be some synergy there. So I think
Sure.
this one's one to watch for sure.
Somebody pointed out, and this is kind of cool, is that if you are holding an objective in enemy territory and you have the primacy, you will discard that primacy at the very end of the round. So
True.
this is one of those rare objectives that get scored in like kind of the nether region of
Yeah.
like
Between
in between rounds
rounds.
somehow, or at the very very end of the round after other things happen. So
Yeah.
that on its own actually makes this
Yeah. That
much
does
more
make,
scoreable
that
than
is
I
very
originally
interesting.
thought on first assessment. So
So you could finish scoring, score all 3 of your objectives, draw a new hand, and then after all the scoring is done, you discard the primacy token. You
right.
could score a card. Oh,
right?
that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, I think there's some precedent for that, specifically with like not exactly like this, but similar with Lady Harrows, where they can draw up objectives, and if they draw, I think one will be on an even and an odd. There's no scoring window identified for
Right.
that, so they can score that in an end phase after drawing it, and then draw another one. So
Hmm.
um, they're few and far between cards that operate in that general space, but there it's not completely unprecedented.
Yeah.
So,
That's a cool one then.
yeah. Overall, objectives didn't like blow me away. I think there's a couple real tech pieces, a couple things I'll kind of keep my eye on. But
Definitely
not,
agree.
yeah, nothing that jumped out at me. Um, are there any gambits that jumped out at you?
Yeah. There's a few that sort of really, but where to start, I guess, is the question. Well, so you kind of alluded to it earlier, so I'll just start here.
Hmm?
With punching up. So
Yeah,
this
I
is
was gonna say,
another one.
speaking of jumping out, like
Yeah.
bursting from the shadows, jumping out like a skink going
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
Kagra.
Um, so this is another one where it's this weird wording around the like highest or lowest characteristics. So this one is choose one fighter with the lowest wounds characteristic of any surviving fighters, which, as we explained earlier, is different than those other cards where it was saying highest or higher than anybody else. It's like it can be the lowest and be tied and still be the lowest. So
Mm,
it's just anybody with the lowest wounds, which is probably going to be 2 or 3, depending on the warbands. And then in the next activation, that fighter is a hunter. They get +1 dice and +1 damage for their range 1 and 2 attack actions.
yeah,
So if you are playing like, I don't know, like weapons gits, or if you're playing Sepulchral Guard, there's probably a lot of play here for being able to suddenly pump a fighter up to some pretty ridiculous levels, to be able to go on a rampage with some
yeah,
interesting upgrades.
yeah. I'll tell you the other thing I like about this, besides the fact that Reavers enjoy it, for then you can really do some stuff with
Oh man,
Targor and such, which is always fun. Um, but what I like is that it makes you reevaluate some other cards. So I think by and large, people had generally kind of with so many speed gambits out there, people left Malkin Grace behind because it's
ooh, yeah, yeah,
+2
yeah.
move, -1 wound. But here you can engineer. So like I could play that on, again, going back to Reavers, I could play that on Blooded Sayic, and like all of a sudden Sayic is uh,
Oh
says
boy,
like, oh, don't, it's just me, just little 2 wound me here, and then all of a sudden he's punching up. So and that feels pretty Reavery too. Hurt
yeah.
yourself to get. So
Ooh, that's good. Um,
uh, so yeah, I like that it makes you kind of reevaluate other cards, and I like that we talk about this in previous episodes, but I like that it's a card that doesn't really do anything for crushes or Molag or
yeah,
whatever.
I think that's definitely an important point. I guess the only other thing that I would mention about this one is that it very specifically calls out their attack actions.
Mm.
So if you have a fighter with scything or something, you could, in theory, be making multiple attacks with that fighter, and they'd all be getting the bonus.
Yeah, I'd like
Um,
to revise my story and say that it was Karsus running up there. Yeah. Actually, yeah, because Karsus with +1 dice and +1 damage also needs 3 fury, 3 damage on that scything attack. That
yeah,
is woof. If you can set that up. Yeah, that's a really good note. And as a reminder, if you're using combo and stuff, combo is going to react after. So I
yep,
think that's, yeah, because it's not during the activation, it'll be an after. So that won't
yep.
be part of it. But yeah, scything for sure. Nice.
where do you want to go here? There's some nice choices.
Yeah. Let's. Well, so I did mention there was a gambit that kind of can target quarries. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
as they open up more of that, punishing people for having quarry, there's narrowing passage, and this is one of those that has wording which I like. It's anti quarry tech, and we've seen in the past it's difficult to create these kind of cards where they target a particular thing, be it quarry or be it casting, all that sort of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes they make these and the card is dead if the opponent doesn't have that. They're making these cards now with a, hey, it's good against what I'm targeting, in this case quarry, and it still has a use even if they don't have a quarry. So in this case, choose an enemy quarry with one or more upgrades, pick one or pick an opponent, and the opponent will choose a fighter in their warband with one or more upgrades. So if you can either pick a quarry, or if you don't pick a quarry, your opponent gets to pick the fighter and then discard one of the fighter's upgrades at random. So first of all, I like it for that, the out it gives you, so it's not dead if they don't have a quarry. And then I think I wasn't wild about it at first, but thinking about a lot of quarries, you can, the most obvious being Cryptic Companion. Sometimes there's just one guy at the back holding on to that.
Yeah.
That's pretty huge. If you can just strip that right back off of him, it's a glory out of their pocket, maybe more. So a lot of the upgrades that turn you into a quarry are pretty powerful, as we've seen, and so there's a good chance that you can pop something good off with this.
Yeah. I mean, this card, this is the kind of control play that I would love to see a lot more of in the game.
Mm.
Like if you want to go full control, like this is going to be one of the cards you probably want. Banshees kind of have a card like this, where it was, I don't remember how it exactly worked, but basically it was a thing where they could react to destroy an upgrade of somebody within so many hexes.
Yeah, I think that something they can take an action to do it, and then
Yeah.
their own upgrade may break in the process or may not.
Yeah, right. But, being able to blow up upgrades has a lot of potential. It's
Mm.
also meaning that your opponent's having to waste resources, right? If they play an upgrade, and I guess like if you play this early in the game, it could be very disruptive.
Mm.
Because if they only have like one or two upgrades out and they were planning on using those and you just blew it up, like that could ruin somebody's plans for the entire like next round or something.
Yeah,
So
totally.
definitely like that one.
Yeah, that's a good point, because if they, like, opponent has to choose somebody with an upgrade. So if you play it at a time where they only have one fighter with an upgrade out, you're gonna get that upgrade out. So yeah, you're right. Really good early on,
Mm-hmm.
actually. Because often that first upgrade is something pretty crucial.
Yeah, something that'll get the train rolling. So
Yeah. There's a couple cards where they do some strange interaction, like cross, I guess, sort of cross mechanic interactions. So, Bountiful Bait.
yeah,
Each fighter with one or more hunger counters is quarry and is on guard. Persist until end of round is one of them. I feel like I can't figure out if this is good or not. Like, if you're Vamps, you can say, okay, well, my whole warband's on guard now. That's kind of cool. Unless they're bloodthirsty and they can't be on ground. That's
yeah,
every time I start thinking about it, I'm like, yes, but actually no, but actually this part is good, but actually, oh man, what's
yeah.
happening?
I can't decide either. I think there's a few different ways that you could play around with this card, but like the timing windows become very odd. Uh,
Yeah.
so it feels like it might be unreliable, but I don't know, being able to put an entire warband on guard all at once is pretty powerful. Being able to make an entire warband quarries could be really strong.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I think this is maybe one you earmark and just say, keep an eye out for this, because
Yeah,
maybe
I
going
think
forward.
again, like maybe there's some control build here. Like it'll help you unlock absolute stillness. It'll help you, and the guard is handy for staying on the objective that you're on, becoming a quarry.
Yeah.
Um, maybe you've got ahead of the hunt or something like that. So yeah, but then you also have to have the hunger out. Yeah. So this, oh boy. Yeah. I mean, I'm literally saying out loud the thought process I keep going through every time I look at this kind of thing. The other one that was a weird interaction was Taste for Power. Did you take a look at that?
Yeah. Yeah. I actually put this one in the test Crimson Court build that I did. I
Oh, you did.
don't think I ever actually got to use it.
Did you ever see
Um,
it or?
I don't think so. I don't think I
Okay.
drew into it. I mean, that that game that we played ended pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
But I mean, so I guess just to make sure people know, this is you give a hunger counter to each fighter in the warband whose player has the primacy token. So if you need hunger, or if you care about hunger in any way, like this is a pretty reliable way to put out a decent amount of hunger.
Sure.
The trouble is like how reliable is primacy? And I think we're seeing that in a lot of warbands now, especially that it's pretty easy to pick it up, which means it's pretty easy to lose it because
Yeah.
somebody else can take it from you. So
Yeah.
this might be good, but it might be too. Again, I think the window for opportunity might be hard to like get it in.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I unless there's like something really specific you're doing with this, I mean, there's weird stuff where you make the other. It's a way to get the other warband hunger if you need that. You can. If you think they're going to have primacy, then you give that to them. They get hunger, and maybe pitiable death is all of a sudden better. There's
Yeah,
it's weird. I see another card you had irresistible hunger in your test deck, right?
I did.
Yeah.
This is sort of another. I was playing around with hunger just because it felt like the Crimson Court, like hunger was probably going to be their thing. Like that if any warband was going to have it, that was going to be it, the one.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like
Right.
let's put all the hunger stuff in and see how it works. So this one is basically just a sort of like a well, what's the name? This is center of attention, but for hunger, and it gives hunger. So if you're caring about hunger, you can get a hunger counter, but then you can push an enemy fighter within 2 hexes, 1 hex towards the fighter that you gave the hunger counter to, or if they then have 2 or more hunger counters, you push each enemy fighter within 2 hexes up to 1 hex closer to that fighter. So, I mean, the second condition is literally just center of attention.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and center of attention is a good card. And I think at the time that I was trying this out, I hadn't really dug into the new Universal Pack a whole lot yet. So it was like, oh, well, that seems like a good push. But now that we have center of attention back, it's kind of like, unless you really want another way to add a hunger counter, this doesn't actually seem like something you take before you took center of attention.
Right. Yeah. Right. There's a lot of cards that are getting picked before this, especially, and a number of them are in the essentials, right? So,
Yep. So
it has the advantage that it doesn't drag your own fighters, although sometimes you actually want that. So,
ooh, that's true.
I think it feels like half the time center of attention is being used, you're actually using it to manipulate your own fighters. But
yeah.
But maybe down the line, if the card pool changes and distractions and nightmares in the shadow start filtering out, then you take a look back here.
Yeah. Or, I mean, if hunger becomes even bigger thing, then
Sure.
maybe. So again, continue to earmark hunger. We don't, even with vampires, we're still not sure.
Yeah. Let's see. lots of weird, like weird wordy cards,
Yeah.
or things doing odd stuff in this pack. Momentary Match was one that I was like, I people are excited about, but then maybe not. And so choose one enemy fighter and one friendly fighter until the end of the next activation. Set the chosen friendly fighter's move, defense, or wounds characteristic to that of the chosen enemy fighter. It's hard to picture the things that will break this wide open. If you're doing move, then this gambit could have just been any of the spectral wings or whatever, because
Yeah.
it's probably not somebody speed too higher than you. I mean, you can see some stuff where you say, okay, my Crusha is now as fast as Skaith or something, but I don't know, like even then, right? Because
Yeah.
Skaith starts at 5, so if Skaith's not inspired, it's still just, I mean, I guess it's flexible, right? But and then defense. So I guess, there's some people bopping their defense up pretty high, and if you've got shields, all of a sudden you could be on 3 shields if you happen to be playing against Zarbag's Gits and the fanatics twirling around. And then wounds feels like the weirdest one of all, because that only lasts for the activation, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that was the immediate one that people basically looked at and went, well, that's never a good idea, because it's not going to, unless you're doing some really weird control stuff where you're like, I know my opponent gets stuff for killing something with high wounds, so therefore I will make myself lower wounds than I already
Oh
was.
my gosh. Yeah.
So that, and that, I don't know. I don't think that's ever going to be worth it, is it?
No, I guess it messes up somebody's primacy play if you bump yourself way up out of
I guess.
a weak fighter. But yeah, there's a lot of flexibility in there, and because there's so much flexibility, I think they played it really safe on this one, and maybe too safe to make it handy.
One thing that I wonder about looking at this card again, which I hadn't thought about before. So a defense characteristic, that includes the symbol, right?
Good question. I don't actually know.
Yeah, I'm not sure either, but I mean, because I feel like, because for almost everything else, it doesn't really matter, but I think it probably is part of the characteristic. So you could, like, you would never be able to be in a situation where you'd be like, oh, I'm 1 shield, but they're 3 dodge, so I'm going to go to 3 shield.
Sure. Yeah. Although in general, I think if you had the option to go to 3 dodge,
yeah, you'd take it. So maybe that's like the real play here, is that you just use it for a defense boost.
But then it is that sort of defense boost for 1 activation only, and those we've seen those cards before.
Yeah, that's just never. It's never
again flexibility. So who knows?
Yeah, somebody will show us that it's very good.
What else you got here? We're closing in on the last of these gambits.
So before I go back to some of the ones that I felt like I would be super interested in, I will just go to another weird one. So Blood-Soaked Ground.
Yeah. Super weird.
So this is a reaction ploy where, and this is the only reaction ploy in this set, you play it after an attack action or a gambit that takes a fighter out of action, and if that fighter was in the same hex as a feature token, you then flip that token, and if that fighter was an enemy fighter, you also gain 1 spent glory point.
Yeah. This is a thinker, right? Like, I've seen it get put into to Feed the Beastgrave decks, because another way to do that. And it's not a friendly or enemy fighter. So if your own fighter gets taken out, you can burn the if you're doing this with Frostborn, you put put good old Quiv to camp on an objective, and then when they pop him, and not only that, but you get a spent glory to boot.
Well, that's only if it's an enemy fighter. So
that's true.
You would have to sort of set that up a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it does feel very punishing if you're using it as an anti hold objective tech
Yeah.
in that case, because it's like, they're going to be on objectives, and then it
Right.
not only gives you a way to get the fighter off of an objective, but then you burn it forever. Well, not maybe forever, but flipping it is usually a forever thing. Most
Sure.
fighters or most warbands don't have the option to flip back. So
Yeah. Yeah. Like in a pretty aggressive deck, flying in, because like you're often you can get that kill, but then they push somebody else back onto it or come back to it, and if you just make it unpalatable in the first place. So
yeah,
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 I think we'll see that in some specialized decks. I don't think that's not so obscure that we won't ever. I think especially that last kicker, the spent glory point,
mm-hmm.
further rewarding you for doing the thing that you're trying to do with a feed the Beastgrave deck anyway.
Yeah.
That's pretty great. So.
And I think, I don't know, this is probably even something we could have a whole separate episode about, but having ways of gaining glory that are not tied to objectives, I think, is something that is somewhat underestimated in terms of how powerful it can be.
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't think we need to like have a whole discussion about it now, but I think that you're right, and that one spent glory can actually make this card very appealing.
Mm. Claim to Supremacy. That this is another one that slots into like maybe there's some play here with that feign strength, feign weakness build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At the end of the next activation, the player whose warband holds the highest number of objectives gains a primacy token. And so, often think about this because we see a lot of this battle, like who can hold the most objectives, especially for end around dominant position being a big deal. People fight pretty hard over the objectives these days. What's funny about this is if you have it early, like you could use it if nobody's on anything, you just use it and then walk onto one, and then you've got primacy.
Yeah.
Although that would be a situation be getting pretty early in the round, and then primacy isn't very well protected. But if you have something that like really wants to have primacy for a reason, like the damage reduction, or you've got objectives, like this is a way to get primacy without dice, right? Like,
yep.
I'm gonna pick up primacy and score my surge of aggression, just because I positioned in a particular
for
way.
not being aggressive at all.
Yeah, exactly. And you can imagine Headcrack is like they say, okay, yeah, I'll pick up. I mean, they may not need it. Maybe they have their own ways of getting primacy or whatever. But yeah, there's that feels like one that I have not seen in play yet. But I feel like I might. Or I feel like people will experiment with it and decide if there's something worth doing there. And I guess there's a weird interaction where if you want your opponent to have it, there's some things where taking the primacy from an opponent, or those cards that we see that punish them for the do extra damage, react for extra damage. Your opponent has primacy, so you can make your opponent have it. So yeah, I guess like you might even put this in a deck that likes farming primacy. So get it, play this against that objective warband. They get it, then you steal it back from them again.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple different ways to go with it.
Yeah. I think what'll be really interesting is if there's ever a reason to go back and forth like that.
Yeah.
You could end up with some weird headspace where you're ending up being like, how am I going to give my opponent primacy?
Yeah.
So definitely like that.
Yeah. And there were, as a resident Magic Warband user, you want to walk us through our last two gambits, which happen to be Gambit Spells?
Yeah. So I'll start with the one that I think is better. So Invincible Aspect. So this is a 2-channel. If cast, choose one friendly fighter within 2 hexes of the caster. You heal 2, the chosen fighter, and then you gain the primacy token. I think the only thing that I am unsure of with this card is that there's been a lot of discussion about when you have cards that direct you to heal, are you allowed to target fighters that can't be healed? Now, we definitely know that healing doesn't work. Like, a fighter is not counted as being healed unless wound tokens are removed.
Right.
The further question ends up being, with the FAQ that said basically that, or I guess it's not even FAQ, but basically saying that, like, for a card to be able to be played, you have to be able to fulfill all of its criteria. Like, do you have to heal to be able to play this? Like,
Yeah. What part of this counts as criteria? Is the criteria choose one friendly fighter within 2 hexes of the caster? Is that the criteria for
right.
casting? Right. Yeah.
So I think if I were to, my interpretation would be like the first sentence is always the criteria. So it's like, this is the thing you need to do to be able to cast the spell.
Yeah.
But I think there's a lot of argument about that. So if that's the way it works, this is basically cast a spell, get primacy, which is amazing. If that's not how it works, it's a little harder, but like putting one wound on a fighter is not super hard. Like, it's going to come up. So like Stormsires would probably like this. I think there's plenty of reason for wanting to be able to heal too, or to get primacy. And this does both. So I think that's pretty good. I think that the 2 channel does make it a little unappealing to anybody who's not Stormsire, though. So that is a, I don't know. That always feels like a downside of Magic, is that sometimes it just becomes so unreliable that you just don't even want to go there.
Vecula can get the Wretchling out and has a much easier time casting this. And
yeah,
maybe there's a thing like a control Wormspat where you're keeping those health pools up and also snaking primacy away to. But yeah,
but having all the like universal innate stuff go away for everybody, except
these are very hard.
Yeah. And then so the other one is another aspect, Magnificent Aspect, which is also 2 channel. If you cast, you choose a friendly fighter within 2 hexes, and then that chosen fighter is inspired. So I mean, free inspires are always good, but again, like, two cast spells are not super reliable. And I think where this is super easy to cast, which is in Stormsires, do you really use this? Like, their inspiration mechanic is so easy.
Yeah. I was kind of ticking down the different warbands. I was like, okay, let's see. Gits, they don't care. Even if they could cast it, there's no one worth, this low probability. Wormspat they could cast, and they do get some nice stuff out of inspiring, but why not just fill the slot with a ping damage thing instead,
right.
and do it that way? And so as because when I first saw it, I was like, oh my god, like magic inspiration strikes. But then once you kind of went through all the possibilities, you're like, oh, I don't know that there is something. But this is the kind of card that you have to remember exists, because if a warband comes out that has a difficult inspire, like if Stalag Squig was a wizard or something in the back, then you'd be like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, it's maybe worth the shot.
Yeah.
So it's just something to keep in the back of your head. I don't know if there's anybody that wants to jump on it right now.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you could see this with Ravagers, because their inspire mechanic is so hard that you'd be like, I don't know, I'm going to take anything I can to try and inspire without having to actually desecrate a whole bunch of objectives. But even then, that it's what, like a not quite 50% chance, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Personally, I'd leave it at home. I guess there's an argument to be made that, like, if you get this early in a Stormsire deck, you could be inspiring Stormsire and one of the other fighters right off the bat, and also be casting a spell, which you want to be doing anyway. But personally, I feel like this one is probably one that you leave at home.
Yeah.
That leads us into upgrades. And I don't know that there's a ton in here that's really jumping out as being super strong. There's just a couple things that I thought we should definitely take.
Yeah. What would those be?
So I think the Silent Helm and the Soul Tooth Dagger are both things that definitely are of note.
Mm.
And then I think the like a potential other one that I think could be of note is the Master of Waze.
Mm.
But I'd like to start with Silent Helm just because it's our first silent relic. And
Yeah.
based on the card, it says if you have 3 or more of these, which definitely indicates it's going to be a set of some sort. So, very interested to see how many more of these we get. But this one in particular makes you a quarry, which we know that things that make you a quarry tend to be decent because they can help you score quarry related stuff. And that anytime that this fighter is a quarry and they are targeted by an attack action, one of the crits in that, or one of the crit symbols in the attack roll is considered to just be a regular success instead.
Yeah. Big deal.
Wow. Like that shifts some math pretty hard on fighters with high defense characteristics.
Right. Somebody throwing a lot of defensive dice, or throwing a lot of defensive dice that have a lot of successes on them. So I'm thinking like Glissette here, 2 dice on guard. You can sometimes burn through her by sneaking a crit in, but if you can't do that, then
yeah. I haven't even really sat down to think about how impactful this could be, but my gut instinct was, yeah, I feel like there's a lot of instances where 1 crit was the difference in this attack. So I really like this card. I think it maybe too strong, just because of the number of 2 and 3 dodge fighters that exist in the world right now.
Yeah.
Who are already usually pretty hard to hit. So
yeah,
it's pretty good.
It'd be interesting to see and I think the big question is, what do the other silent relics look like? Because the bonus for having 2 or more, or 3 or more is how many you have. So this is a little harder to assemble than some of the others, right?
It is.
But rerolling a defense die on top of all this other, on top of like ignoring crits, like that's a super big deal too. So
yeah. As an aside, I definitely put this in my Starblood deck because I care about having quarries, and then in certain situations, putting this on Autopodal or putting this on to one of the other 2 dodge fighters, or even I guess onto Kalactroc when he's inspired.
Ooh, gross! Oh no,
such a good upgrade.
Yeah. Good call. Right. The other one you mentioned, Soul Tooth Dagger.
Yep.
A little bit of flavor throwback to Shade Glass Dagger.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, not quite as powerful, but it doesn't break all the time either.
It doesn't break.
A little more accurate because you get rerolls. Yeah, exactly. This kind of upgrade is like some warbands like it more than others. I like this specific thing. Although you are crit fishing, so 3 fury, 2 damage, 1 range, +1 damage on a crit. Although you are crit fishing, your opponent has to respect that. Like they have to look at that and be like, okay, well that fighter actually has a output of 3 damage before any other things get added to the mix. And so all of a sudden you're putting mental pressure on them as like, well, what if they roll a crit?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, and it also makes you hunter, which is always good. And I mean, if you're crit fishing, having rerolls, which it gives you rerolls, is also good. So I mean, I think this is probably one of the better weapons we've seen recently, and we'll probably see it in a lot of decks. And then I guess that leaves us with Master of Ways is the only other one that I had called out, and that one I think is interesting just because of it being another teleport. So it gives you an action where you have to discard the primacy token, and then if you do, you then get to place the fighter that has this upgrade in the same hex as an objective token, and then you have to give them a charge token. and then of course it has the thing like a lot of these upgrades with primacy do, where if they're killed, you have to discard primacy.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mean that doesn't really bother me. I don't think that's really going to be the thing that like decides whether you take this card or not.
Yeah.
I think the thing that decides this is how much do you care about giving up primacy, and how reliable do you feel like getting primacy is going to be.
Yeah.
But I feel like teleports are always really strong, and this one, other than discarding primacy, has no other conditions on it,
Sure.
which I think is really good, because a lot of the teleports, it's like pick a fighter that doesn't have move or charge tokens and then do a thing, or that's not
Mm-hmm.
adjacent to any enemy fighters, or is on an edge hex, or like they make the positioning the big,
Mm-hmm.
limiting factor. Whereas here it's just primacy. So like if I have Proud Runner, I run a guy across the board, score some stuff, and then in my next activation, I discard primacy and then teleport onto an objective. Like
Mm-hmm.
for a hold objective play, this feels like a very strong card, but I think it's going to be something you really have to plan out ahead of time.
You have to have a cohesive strategy to be able to really leverage it.
Yeah. Were there any other upgrades that you felt were worthy of note?
So there's a swath of hunger ones that looked kind of suboptimal to me. Starvation's grip.
Yep.
If you have hunger, you can't be pushed. That actually is maybe something in there in a vamp control build.
Yeah.
Because there's stone skin, I think, which is the same thing. Can't be pushed, but -1 move. So a little trade off. I think you'll see that around Famished Familiar, doing damage to give yourself a casting reroll. That's pretty rough. Like usually your caster is often your leader, and damaging them,
Yeah.
you have access to that in other places. And then Awesome Appetite is if you each time you attack, if you take an adjacent target of action, heal 1 and give this fighter 1 hunger counter. We've seen that with Vampiric Weapon back in the Shadespire days. I think there's some fighters that would care about it, but heal 1's pretty modest. So I think you'd have to be doing something that really wants the hunger as well. So
Agreed. And like even the Mandibles of the Urgrub gives you a heal 1 for, I think, just successfully hitting an adjacent fighter. So
right. So sometimes taking people out is a little bit of a big ask there. So that's the hunger mechanic for you. Maybe vampires are interested. The rest are less certain.
Yeah. So that just leaves us with a couple others that are all. So we've got a couple that are sort of attack related, and then we've got one quarry thing. So you've kind of been talking through other like quarry related stuff some this episode.
Yeah.
How about you run us through that one?
So I think Prey Bond, there's another upgrade. It's something familiar.
Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, but
blanking on it. But there's one that gives you an extra support in defense, which is what this does. This has a lower floor and a higher ceiling, basically. If you have one other quarry, you're gonna have one support. If you have 2 other quarries, you're gonna have double support, which is pretty cool. If you put a lot of quarry cards in there, and then someone like Glissette is all of a sudden, picking this up, and if there's Slake Slash and somebody else then upgraded to a quarry, then she is defending on all faces of the dice. So just get her that Silent Helm. She doesn't even need the rerolls. So I think that that's going to show up in defensive builds, defensive quarry builds, and I think those are definitely out there. This sort of absolute stillness, cryptic companion sort of thing. Prey Scent is you become a quarry, and then it gives you a reaction after an enemy fighter's activation. If the fighter is 2 hexes from this fighter, or if that fighter has 3 or more hunger counters, push that fighter 1 hex towards this fighter. 2 hexes. So it's important they didn't do 3 hexes, because that's how you could be standing on one objective and yank somebody off another objective. But if you get into kind of a central spot there, kind of charge in somewhere, and then they're trying to move on to objectives, you can start pulling them back off of it. And then if even more so, if somebody's rocking around with a lot of hunger, then you can yank them from even further. So this feels like if you can get in a central spot, you can really kind of mess with somebody's ability to be standing on objectives, which is pretty handy. I think there's some cool play with that one. I don't know if it finds room, but I think there's really cool tech there. Disrupting, basically, it's a limited range and limited direction, but it's a distract. Multiple distractions basically built into a card, which has a lot of potential.
Yeah, and I guess anytime that you can just have a guaranteed after enemy activation reaction is always a decent thing to have.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Ripa's not a huge fan of this one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That could so then they don't get their wolf bites, and you could also mess up their positioning. So that'd be very interesting.
Yeah, I guess thinking about it, that'll come back around to the Gambits having to be able to do everything on this if they're adjacent to. They don't have to be. Oh, they do have to be pushed one towards this fighter. So yeah, I wonder that rule doesn't necessarily explicitly apply to things that are not Gambits, but I wonder if it could be conflated. I don't know. Positioning game, big deal. I think somebody with a big brain can figure out some cool stuff to do with this and really ruin somebody's day.
All right, so we just got 2 left, and I don't think either of them are super great, but they have some use. Start with Armed to the Teeth. So this is an interesting one in that it's an upgrade that gives a bunch of different bonuses, but they only apply, or each bonus only applies to a different range of attacks. So if it's a range 1, you get knockback 1, which probably the worst thing on here. If it's range 2, they get ensnare. That actually feels pretty good. And then range 3+, they get cleave, which for certain fighters could be nice, but I think more often than not, you don't super care about having cleave on your ranged attacks. Malug just getting free ensnare though feels pretty nice.
Yeah.
Or any of the other like spears or other reach weapons. So I think there's a little bit of something for everybody with Armed to the Teeth, but like I said, I think that knockback is maybe the worst part of it. And then the last card here. So we got Tremendous Maul. So this is a reach 2 hammer, 2 smash weapon upgrade, where if you have the primacy token when you make the attack, it has cleave and knockback 2. I think knockback 2 is actually kind of interesting here because at reach 2 with knockback 2, you could seriously mess up somebody's positioning. Because that's knocking them back 3 spaces. So, that could put somebody halfway across the board.
I will admit, when I first looked at this, I did not notice the 2 range. Like that's a big deal.
Yeah. So like this is a straight good weapon. Like 2 reach, 2 smash for 2 damage is never a bad thing. The question, I guess, that makes you wonder if this is really going to be the thing you take is how reliable is your primacy. If you think you're always going to have it when you need it, then this is probably pretty good. But I think more often than not, it's situational and you'll just be getting a pretty basic attack action.
Yeah, and you wonder if the warbands that are already earning primacy are the ones that have attacks that are pretty competitive with this anyway. So,
all right, I think that brings us home. We have wrapped up every card in the universals here. And I think, as we sort of mentioned before, the general feel out of this set is that there's a lot of sort of wordy, different sort of headspace kind of cards, but nothing like other than like Silent Helm, Like there's nothing that's like, oh man, I have to play with this.
Yeah.
So sort of a weird set of universals, I felt like.
Yeah. And maybe a good one to have late in the season like this. Like a lot of, I mean, where they are making some of their more creative cards, and some of them are going to be misses, but these are the ones that like once the core of the universals has started to get a little bulked out, maybe now is the time to put on these weird like experiments where you know, maybe they work if you find space for them. Maybe like these are the cards that the mad scientists might find some roles for, and maybe this is the time of the season where these should be coming out.
Yeah, I think that's actually an interesting point, because I think we've, especially with the lack of FAQs and restricted lists, at least I feel like the meta has solidified pretty well. And so maybe if you're just kind of bored of the meta, you just start messing around with stuff and you're like, I don't know if this will work, but let's try it because this is a really weird card and I can't decide if this is good or not.
Right.
I guess
if nothing else, the Vassal Clash to me looked like people were ready to experiment.
Yeah. I mean, wait, everybody's not just rolling up with Crushes and Mollog anymore? Yeah. When you're not playing for hardware, sometimes it just doesn't pay to win. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's definitely an interesting take. I think there's maybe an argument to be made that more of this kind of stuff belongs at the beginning of the season, just because it's like it forces people to play with it, but could also mean that they just don't pick up any cards from the new season either.
Right.
Any final thoughts on any of these cards before we wrap it up here?
Do you have an overall favorite from this set?
I mean, it's got to be Silent Helm, at least for me. I think because of how well it works with the Stalkers, I think it's like, well, that was an immediate choice that had to go right in as soon as I got these sort of figured out as to like, what are they all doing?
Yeah. For me, it's Punching Up.
It's a good one too.
Yeah, I think mostly because it kind of benefits some of the warbands that I enjoy playing, or at least thinking about playing. So
yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to try an aggro Starblood sometime, and if I do, that card is definitely going to be in there, because
they can really leverage that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, should we wrap it up here?
Let's do it.
Okay. So thanks for listening. You can always chat with us further at WTHcast or with the Hexcast at gmail.com. You can hit us up on the Mortal Realms Discord, where listeners of all the different shows on the network kind of hang out. Some good chat in there. If you want to access that stuff, you can go to the website as well, themortalrealms.com. We do also sell some apparel that promotes the different shows that we do. They're pretty cool. Just one more thanks for listening. Coming up, we will either feel like we know enough about the Crimson Court to play, having played with and against them to do that. And we're also working on a review of the starter set. We're going to take a slightly different angle. I think we're going to, I've kind of gotten my copy to someone who hasn't really played it before, and having him try it out. And we'll pull him in and have him talk about his experience as a Underworld's neophyte, and how it felt playing the starter set there. So look for that to come. I think our idea there is that's going to be an asset that people will be able to use. If you got a friend who's saying, "Hey, I'm not sure, I'm thinking about getting into this," or whatever, you can point them to that and say, "Hey, the starter set's a good place to start. And if you want to know more about it, then check this out." So more to come on that when we get that bundled up. Recommended listening for this episode is Universal Soldier by J Electronica. And I think that about does it. So for What the Hex, I've been Davey.
And this is Phil. Feels like a long time ago already.
It does. Oh
Oh,
yeah, searching for hex is not helpful in a forum on